just wanna be involved. See, I was only talking to Biggie, but I'll kill all of y'all.
A lot of people ask me stupid fucking questions. A lot of people think that what I say on record, or what I talk about on the record, that I actually do in real life, or that I believe in it. Or if I say that I want to kill somebody, that I'm actually gonna do it, or that I believe in it. Well, shit, if you believe that, then I'm killing you. You know why? Because I'm a criminal! Criminal! You goddamn right, I'm a criminal! Yeah, I'm a criminal!
Henry Kissinger was the United States Secretary of State from 1973 to 1977 and became famous for shaping policy in Vietnam, the Middle East, and especially China. Especially China. And especially China.
Henry Kissinger is a titan of American politics.
We will not be blackmailed.
Having served as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor during the Nixon and Ford administrations. He pioneered the détente period of easing tensions with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and in 1972 coordinated a breakthrough summit in China, paving the way for formal diplomatic relations between the two countries. Dr. Kissinger spoke to the Economist Asks podcast.
Henry Kissinger's undergraduate thesis set a record at Harvard. At 383 pages, it is thought to be the longest ever written. So lengthy that future projects were limited to a third of the size. It examined the meaning of history and the role that individuals play in shaping it. The young Kissinger took in thinkers from Socrates to Kant to Dostoevsky. Eventually, the thesis was awarded the highest possible honors. For the best part of a century, Kissinger has thought a lot about the relationships between the world's great powers and how to prevent war between them. Today, a sense of that threat is palpable. From Washington and Beijing, the problems are clear. Mutual suspicion, little contact, a struggle for dominance. Meanwhile, Europe is at war, and Russia is tumbling into China's orbit. For a sobering analysis of how grave the risks are, you just need to go to Midtown Manhattan. There are so many photographs in here, Dr. Kissinger.
Well, this is presidential pictures here in this corner.
Two presidents you served? Kissinger first arrived in New York in 1938 as a refugee fleeing Nazi Germany. He became one of the towering figures of 20th century foreign affairs. First as a scholar, and then a practitioner, National Security Advisor and Secretary of State to Presidents Nixon and Ford, he shaped some of the most controversial and consequential episodes of American foreign policy. For the past half-century, Kissinger emerged as a quiet counselor and emissary to presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs around the world. I'm Zanny Minton-Beddoes, editor of The Economist, and this is a podcast special featuring our conversation with Henry Kissinger, which we're publishing just days before his 100th birthday. I wanted to talk to him about how to avoid World War III. Now, that might sound hyperbolic, but having just been to Beijing and to Washington frequently, I am struck by just how poor the relationship is between the US and China. It seems genuinely broken. So that's where we began. Can we start with your assessment? How great is the risk of war? Are we on a path to great power conflict?
We are on a path to great power confrontation. Both sides have convinced themselves that the other represents a strategic danger. So a situation can arise in which an issue escalates into a confrontation. And when you have an issue like Taiwan, that danger is even more enhanced.
You've spent your lifetime considering the concept of world order. Put today into that historical context, how does the threat today compare with previous episodes?
Well, I started thinking about this very early on in my life, probably when I was in military service during the war. How to prevent such catastrophes from happening again. The conventional answer at the end of World War II was to prevent aggressors from imposing their will early enough so that they could not achieve military dominance. When I entered government, I turned out to be in a position in which my recommendation would be part of any final decision to go to war. I asked myself increasingly how one could have a stable system based on mutual assured destruction. But it presented us with a paradox which we, on some level, haven't solved. We can all take credit for avoiding nuclear war for 75 years. That is an important achievement. But it was never explicitly negotiated that way. So now the situation is that China is developing genuine capabilities, plus an economy that is competitive to some extent with the United States. So we are in the classic pre-World War I situation, where neither side has much margin of political concession, and in which any disturbance of the equilibrium can lead to consequences. It's our duty to maintain the equilibrium if we know how to define it.
One thing that is, I think, difficult sometimes to understand is what China's own conception of its global role is. I believe when you first met Zhou Enlai, you had dinner and you were discussing conceptions of world order.
In my first conversation with Zhou Enlai, I had prepared a little speech of how we got there. And it ended with, so we now find ourselves in what to us is a land of mystery. And before I finished, Zhou held up his hand and said, "May I interrupt? Tell me what is so mysterious about China." And I gave a banal answer because he said, "Let us see that we can take the mystery out of it And after you know us better, and there is 1 billion of us, I hope it will not be so mysterious to you. Well, the basic question is this. Is it possible for China and the United States to coexist without the threat of all-out war with each other? I thought, and still think, the negative proof of that has not yet been given, because Taiwan is a special case. Every Chinese leader has asserted its essential connection to China.
Kissinger launches into this story about how when Mao and Nixon met, Nixon being Nixon tries to negotiate a whole lot of deals, and Mao interrupts him and says, "I'm a philosopher. I don't deal with these subjects. Let John Kissinger deal with this." And that all goes on fine, except when it comes to Taiwan.
When it got to Taiwan, he was very explicit. He said, they're a bunch of counter-revolutionaries. We don't need them now. We can wait 100 years. Someday we will ask for them. But that's a long distance away. So this became the basis of our arrangement, that the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits affirm their goal of one China. The United States does not challenge that proposition. There's no doubt that the implication of our conversations was that we would not support a two-China policy and that they would not use force.
Let's fast forward to today. Have either or both of those elements changed? Has the US position changed on Taiwan?
Well, that policy was continued until the Trump administration. He wanted to be perceived as exacting demands he made in the economic field. I agreed with the objectives he had to get a better balance, but he then turned it into quite a confrontational matter.
Trump went to try and negotiate some trade concessions from China, an objective that actually Kissinger agreed with. But what he didn't agree with was after this, in the press conference, when Trump claimed that he'd extracted these concessions and sort of humiliated China. And Kissinger thought that was a turning point. And he also argues, I think accurately actually, that broadly the Trumpian policies towards China have been continued by the Biden administration with slightly more liberal rhetoric.
So the margin for concession here is very limited. On the other hand, the way things have evolved now, it is not a simple matter for the United States to abandon Taiwan without undermining its position elsewhere.
And what about Russia? Is Russia now fated to be, the junior partner or the vassal state to China? And what would be the consequences of that?
Russia has been integrally tied to Europe at least since the 15th century. And so much of the great history of Europe has involved Russia. And within Russia, there has always been this ambivalent feeling of living in unique danger, but also having a unique moral relationship to Europe. I have never met a Russian leader who said anything good about China. And I've never met a Chinese leader who said anything good about Russia. They are sort of treated with contempt And even when Putin is in China, he is not shown the kind of courtesies that they showed to Macron, taking him to a special place that is tied to the history of the Chinese leader. And they don't do that for the Russians. So it's not a natural alliance.
This status of Russia as the junior partner, the vassal partner in Kissinger's mind, is clearly not a natural state of affairs. It's been brought about by the destruction of Russia's relationship with Europe, thanks, of course, to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Was where we are now inevitable? Was it a failure of Western diplomacy? Or was it the catastrophic failure of judgment by Putin?
It was certainly a catastrophic mistake of judgment by Putin. The evolution towards it, I thought that the decision to leave open the membership of Ukraine in NATO was very wrong and unwise. Because if you looked at it from the Russian point of view, in 1989 they controlled Europe up to the Elbe River. And every square inch of what they withdrew from became part of NATO. The only thing that was left was a country they always considered as the little brother closest to them organically or historically. And now that is going into NATO. So I think for Putin it was a final turning point. And at that time, Putin was even saying in conversations with me that he didn't object to Ukraine becoming part of an economic system with Europe. And then if you look at it last year, he made a proposal on long-term NATO, and we didn't take it seriously.
So at this point, Kissinger restates an argument he's made that is quite controversial, that it was a mistake for NATO in 2008 to dangle the possibility of NATO membership to Ukraine.
It's interesting because in offering Ukraine membership to NATO, NATO is doing something that's bound to anger Russia. But at the same time, NATO's not really serious about the offer, so it's not doing anything to protect Ukraine. So it's just adding to instability.
So now we're, 2.5 hours into this mammoth conversation, and we discussed China, we discussed Russia, and then Kissinger gets on to his third area of dangerous threat for the world, the third source of instability, and that is artificial intelligence, AI. Now, he clearly, and by his own admission, has no understanding of the technical side, although he does, mention LLMs, large language models, kind of in passing, as though he does know something about what they mean. But quite clearly, Henry Kissinger, a few years ago, decided that this new AI technology was going to be transformative and has already written one book on it, is planning another, and sees this as one of the great threats facing humanity.
We may well wind up destroying ourselves. And a point is now quite reachable where the machines can refuse to be shut off. Many senior scientists believe that. They know more than I do.
So you have the risks that come from both the US and China acting incautiously. There are the risks that come from technology. Together, with your careful assessment of risks that you've spent your career doing, how much time do we have?
Look, I think the technology will become more and more dangerous when combined with the other factors within 5 years.
5 years takes us to 2028, through the next presidential term, and it looks as if the next presidential term is going to be between Biden and quite possibly Trump, and that's not renewal. That's not a Kennedy coming in who can inspire something different. That is a continuation of...
Yeah, I don't think Biden can supply the inspiration. And I'm hoping that the Republicans will come up with somebody better. Look, it's not a great moment in history, but the alternative is total abdication. But the alternative is total abdication. Total abdication.